has an evolution that is growing with your age, at least until a certain moment. Children still want continuous stories. They want that there are no such thing as breaks and broken into pieces and so forth. Telling stories, making sense. So you want continuity. But the aesthetics in the 21st century go towards breaking into pieces, different points of view. So I have promised to make you see that different ways of plotting are related to your daily life, to your experience, the experience you are acknowledging every day. So you can see how different genres, different literary genres are transforming the literary world. During a very long time, you had a narrator knowing everything about his figures, his characters, the things they do, the things they think, and so forth. We call that an auctorial narrator. But then you remember the figures, the different figures in the caves in northern Africa. I've shown to you yesterday. Well, when was that? On Thursday. You've seen all these different figures. So it's a personal way of telling story. So you take the perspective of one of these figures, then you take the perspective of another, and so it's changing. You take perhaps 3 or 4 personal points of view, and so you can construct this. You can see that in literary history. There's kind of prefiguration in the 18th century. You can see that the different letters exchanged, for example, by different lovers in Julie ou la Nouvelle Héloïse in Rousseau, are kind of prefiguration of that. Yeah, you have different writers of letters, and these letters, the exchanges of letters, tell stories from always a personal perspective. Yeah, when you write a letter, if you still know what a letter is in our time, that's not for sure. Have you ever written a letter in your life? Did you write a letter? Okay. But would you write love letters as well, as a certain generation or generations and generations did? Perhaps not. You would choose other ways of communicating, and so these in the 18th century were love letters, and letters were just very explicit in the way of expressing, and very timid in the way of facts. So it's quite interesting that how things are going on, how they are transformed. And today perhaps you can just put your finger on a heart and then send it to your beloved one, and perhaps this is a sign that the other one is understanding. So things are getting more and more complex and more broken into pieces. So when you listen to a story, please think about other possible perspectives. When you listen to a story that brings you in contact with a given event, that is plotted in a certain continuous way. Please think about different perspectives that are possible. This kind of narration is fundamental to understand and to foster your empathy with other people, in order to overcome your own perspective, that your own perspective is not prevailing all the other perspectives that may be possible in your life. This is what literature is all about. So, for example, when I write my own novels, I continually try to change perspectives. That means that you have very different characters that express their own position, very different characters that are embedded in the story, but telling the same story. If not, it would be too complicated. Telling the same story. So, for example, different characters and heroes that tell a story about the life of a person. And then you can imagine, of course, animals telling human stories as well. Animals are extremely important. We sometimes we do not see animals so much, and we know very little about the animals. But think about I don't know, perhaps you had a dog when you were a child at home, or a cat, or another animal, and so these were animals you could even name or give names to. But in fact, you didn't know so much about the animal, but the animal knew a lot about your own life. When you entered the apartment, the animal immediately recognized your presence and knew that you would go perhaps directly to the kitchen and have a drink of water or whatsoever. So animals know extremely well how humans behave. Animals are continually watching us. We don't see that. So they can tell, of course, stories. You know that animals are very intelligent in knowing things about your own lives, and the perspective is different. So, of course, you can create in literature, you can create animals whose perspective opens a new idea about the daily life of a given person. Yeah? And this is something which is very important. So, for example, in a novel, in my second novel, I have designed a dog, a little dog, accompanying the philosopher, the black philosopher, the first black philosopher in Germany in the 18th century. And of course, this was fiction, but the fiction is based upon the historical elements of a given story, and the animal is plotting in a different way. And imagine a small dog, a German poodle, and he's watching all the historical figures, and he's not so much interested in in what they think, but he knows something about their shoes. He knows something, the animal knows something about the smell of the person, knows something about the character, and not perhaps the philosophical ideas of this person. So the perspective is different. And for example, you can if you are always fixing and looking at the shoes of a person, then you can see how this person stands in life. Perhaps something that from a human perspective, where you have the I here, up there, and you can see from face to face in a face-to-face communication. This is different as when you see from there, from the perspective here. You understand? So you change the perspective and you change the story. And by changing the story, you can easily develop something different. This is what fiction allows you. It's like a laboratory. You can play with that. And yeah, I would like to give you to get into a conversation with you about these different ways of producing sense, of making sense. So, do you have questions? Do you have questions to ask me? Or if you for the moment are too shy, do you think that stories, or did your parents tell you stories when you were a small child? Do you remember stories that were told to you when you were still a child? And can you remember anything related to stories in your life? Oh, I don't believe you. Are there any stories you can tell? I would be very happy if you could tell me any story about things. Or were there stories told by a recorder, or I don't know, any machine when you tried to sleep, when your parents put on a machine? These are the stories my US American students always tell, that their parents didn't tell them stories, but they were just putting a recorder with stories. And then the children, as children, my students in the US, they they happened to know fairy tales told by a voice in the recorder. Is there something in China as well? Yeah. Thank you for that question. That's very complex. I mean, you can imagine yourself as a character in a novel, right? This is this could be a start. You imagine yourself as a character and told by, let's say, your best friend. Of course, you can write down your own life seen from the perspective of your best friend or of your parents, for example. I don't know if that would be really good, but by your best friend. And then you could, of course, write down a um, a story which is developing your own position, your own story. Perhaps you have already written down a story in that sense. That's absolutely possible. It's very easy. It's very easy, and it's very interesting to see how a character that is yourself is developing under your hands, and how you can imagine this character in life, or how you could imagine being, let's say, 20 years old, your own life when you're 40. Normally, it's the other way around. Yeah, you're 60 and you're looking back to your life and you're telling the story of your life. That's autobiography. But you can imagine easily that what will be my life when I'm 45. Yeah? So this is a way where you can develop your own character, and you can see it from different points of view, from different angles, from different perspectives. And changing these perspectives allows you to rethink, to see your own figure, your own position from different points of view. And you see different persons, even characters, even personalities from this kind of literary experiment. I would say that it's, literature is as old as humankind. Humans need stories to tell from the very start. For a very long time it has been oral stories, not written down. Humans had no possibility to write it down. But these oral stories, they were transformed when it was possible to write down, since now 5,000 years, so 3,000 years before our era. Then we could conserve these stories. Yeah. And I don't know if you are familiar with ways of writing. If you have, for example, a personal diary. I don't know if this is very popular in China today. Of course, you can write down on your smartphone, and then every day you just add a chapter or so, and so the transformation of your own life, for example, into a character, into a literary character, makes you understand your own position much better than you've been understanding yourself before. Is that an answer to your question? I mean, you can put yourself into a story, and you can transform your own life into a story in very different ways. And you can write it down, and you can transform it into a character. That's fiction. You are the real person, but at a given moment, you are writing down a story and you're telling about your own life, and then you see that your character has something to do with your daily life, but it is not identical to your daily life. You transform it and you see it from outside. Sometimes something you cannot achieve by just looking in the mirror, right? So this is as a very creative way to reflect on your own story, reflecting your own story. And it's much more creative than when you're age 80 and you tell your grandchildren about grandfather's life. That's a little bit boring, and perhaps the children will go away after 5 minutes of talk. Yeah. So, but if you write down and you try to work on the structure, perhaps even your grandchildren would be delighted to read at a given moment the story of the grandfather. So um, that's the power of literature. And of course, you have alluded to that, Hayen. Um, you have alluded to all the and yesterday I was asked, on Thursday I was asked a question about the death of literature, or the fading away of literature, or the disappearance of literature. Well, literature is as old as the human being, and it is an oral literature, and then it's a literary literature. And literature goes through different media. It is based upon first the oral dimension, and then you write it down on a clay tablet, and then you write down on a papyrus, and then the invention of paper, and then the invention of printing press, and so forth. So it's changing all the time. I myself have started when I was a student, writing down with a pencil and with ink, and I had a typewriter, and a huge typewriter as big as that. And when I was traveling, I had a typewriter that was traveling with me, but it was still very heavy. And then I had my first computer. It was a Commodore 333, and you could change the words, not many, but because if not, it would have been too complicated for your computer. So things were changing quickly in my life. So different supports, material supports of writing down. Yeah? And perhaps within 15 years you have another way of writing. That's pretty probable, yeah, that within 15 years you have different ways of writing down, of invention. But literature is still there. It's independent of the support, of the material support. It's independent if you write. It's not important if you write on a clay tablet, on a papyrus roll, on a paper, and so forth. So yeah, are there any other questions? Then I would like to address something I have promised at the very start of this class, narratology. First, in the early 20th century, a Russian named Vladimir Prof tried to analyze fairy tales. And he got aware of the fact that most of the fairy tales have a specific structure. It starts at a given moment, and then it tells a story, and in the story there are people who are positive and others who are negative, or characters or animals or whatsoever that are positive and negative. And then he tried to reduce it to a given structure that is given for Russian fairy tales, and for French fairy tales, and for German fairy tales, and so forth. This was the very start of something that was developed in a structuralist way in the late 50s and in the 60s, and specifically in Russia, in the US, and first of all in France and in Germany. And the idea behind was reduce every kind of story to a given structure. And if you can reduce the complexity of all the stories you can tell, so myths of the Greek antiquity, or myths of the Amazon indigenous people living in the Amazon, or writings of Chinese storytellers. If you can reduce that to a given formula, to a given structure, the structuralists were convinced that this could be the structure of human thought. Having access to a kind of ground basic structure in your head by analyzing the recurrence of specific patterns in your stories, right? That was the structuralist idea. And in a post-structuralist, okay, so this is the classical, the so-called classical narratology. And you had models in order to give the structure of this kind of narratology. And this was extremely important later, some decades later, for the development of artificial intelligence. Because then different, in an interdisciplinary way, different disciplines come in. So these were literary scholars at the very start and linguistic scholars. And later it was about psychologists and, I don't know how to tell that, how to say that, cognitional scientists. So Kognitionswissenschaft. So it's about cognition, recognition. For example, you can see the understanding of a story by analyzing how your eyes movement. This is called eye tracking. Yeah, I've been working together with people who did eye tracking, and then you can see by the movements in your eye the process of your understanding. Yeah, it's quite a basic understanding of how the human brain works. So, for example, you can see that 0.3 milliseconds, if your eye is fixed upon a character in a story, then you see that there is something hidden in the story. There's something very important. So you can do an analysis with that. And you find out a structure. So let's say, go to DeepSeek, and the result you get is based upon a structure that is a narrative structure. It's based upon this. It's always the answer you get. You ask a question, and then a story is told. Why is there a story? Because it's much more convincing than just an enumeration of facts. You have to. This is a very deep insight in human understanding, that you will be much more satisfied if a story is told, even a story at a very low level of complexity. You are much more satisfied than if just facts are enumerated, right? And at the very end, DeepSeek asks you if you want more information about this or more information about that, and so forth. Do you use DeepSeek? Yeah? Do you use different programs of artificial intelligence? Yeah. And you will see that the results is different. Yeah? And so different stories are told. Okay, so let's go back. Structuralist narratology, and then the post-structuralist narratology develops elements that are flexible, mobile. In post-structuralist theory or narratology, you can see how they inbuilt flexibility of different perspectives. It's not a fixed structure, it's a mobile structure that is constructed lately. And that is in a much more complex formula, but it's still a formula. It's still a formula that you can reduce and that you can later inbuild in artificial intelligence. So there's still the dream of the structuralist narratologists. to analyze the stories, to reduce it to a formula, and then understand how the human brain works. This is exactly artificial intelligence, only with a much more technologically, much more developed sensorium, a much more developed methodology, right? So you can see that in the late 50s and 60s, the ground was, the groundbreaking understanding of human mind laid the foundations of artificial intelligence half a century later. It's a very long process. And it starts with literature. It starts with fairy tales. It starts with stories that you tell children, for example, in order to satisfy their need to make sense out of the world. As humans, we need to make sense. So if we ask artificial intelligence, please tell me what is this and that, it's still the same behavior. It's like children asking to make sense out of it. So ask DeepSeek, for example, about, I don't know, about a specific a question in your life. So please, DeepSeek, please tell me about the history of artificial intelligence, for example. And the DeepSeek will tell you a story about that, making sense. It will not so much problematize the different tools and different programs of this kind of artificial intelligence. It will not so much talk about what technicians call hallucinations. You know what hallucinations are in artificial intelligence? When we were talking about that, when artificial intelligence is inventing things. So, for example, the first question I asked DeepSeek when I just downloaded DeepSeek, still in Germany, the first question I asked was, do you know Ottmar, Ette? Who's that person? And then there was an autobiographic information that, by the way, was wrong. The birth date was wrong. And then it said, it's an Hungarian critique. And I asked DeepSeek, are you sure that Ottmar Ette is a Hungarian critique? And then he said, of course, I have many informations about that. So the fact that I asked these questions may have implemented, I mean, it's learning systems, it's mobile systems, making sense, that may have provoked that they changed it already. I mean, that the machines, the algorithmic structure of the machine has been changed. But it's very interesting that this kind of false response or false answer is called hallucination. Yeah? Hallucination in the sense that it's convinced that this is the answer, but it's artificial intelligence. There is no consciousness behind. Yeah? So it's very interesting that if you when you use artificial intelligence for the next time, please think about narrative structures. Think about narratives. Don't take it as something natural brought to you. That is kind of answering the question you had. Try to understand that this is, in a way, like with children, telling stories, making sense. Telling stories, making sense. Only at a different level, all right? So it's not a fairy tale, but it can tell you a story about somebody you know, like in the case, like in the example just try to give you, and to see in which sense this kind of story is plotted in a given circumstance, and then you can easily see, if you use different kinds of artificial intelligence, that the stories told are different. So you can implement, and I think that's a good idea, you can implement different perspectives. Depending on the country these things were created, depending on the moment these things were, depending on the intention these things were created. So this is a very important thing. Do you have any questions about narratology, about cognitive psychology? I mean, this is perhaps the term in English, cognitive psychology. So eye tracking systems and so forth, and the way even your eye movements are expressing not only emotion but understanding. And this is, of course, the reason why artificial intelligence depends on your reaction. Yeah. So it's learning systems, mobile systems. Do you have any questions about this? Yeah.
Last week you said that it's very easy for you to distinguish the story written by artificial intelligence and by human. And I want to know how, which way can you so easily distinguish between these two stories? Yeah.
So the difference between artificial intelligence and the stories told by humans. Did I get it right? Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I got the first PhD projects based upon artificial intelligence. At the very start, I was surprised, and I was not sure if this was something serious, because when you have a PhD project, you don't develop that on artificial intelligence, you develop that on the basis of research done by yourself. So how can I see that something is artificial intelligence? Because first, the story told is very simple. The elements, how the story is told, there are only 5 or 6 ways to tell that story. For example, if you know what a state of the arts is. So you're working in a field and then you give a state of the arts. That is all the research done before you enter the stage, right? So you're working on, let's say, travel literature, and then you have a state of the arts of theory of travel literature, right? And then you have all the different stories. And so a research done by artificial intelligence is different from the research you're doing by yourself, because it's absolutely trying to get all the elements into a plot. This is the first thing you can easily recognize. It's all the elements, all the different theories that has been developed in that field are brought into a plot. That's the narratology behind artificial intelligence. It's inbuilt. It's inbuilt, and you can easily detect it. And there is no such thing as a complexity of, let's say, a complexity of a state of the arts, of a history of things developed in different countries, for example. Yeah. artificial intelligence has a lot of problems with different developments in different countries. They all try to get it into something, or they distinguish between different countries and then they tell 5 different stories. But that's not how science works normally. Because, of course, somebody who does research in China is well informed about research in, let's say, in the US. And somebody in the US knows about the research done in Germany. So distinguishing between the research in Germany and in China, and that's already something I say, okay, that must be artificial intelligence. You understand what I mean? The narratology behind is a very, let's say, it's a very easy, down-to-earth structure. It's not very complex. I'm sure that technicians in artificial intelligence will implement that. But until now, ChatGPT or DeepSeek or whatever is not using that kind of sophisticated intelligence that we use as researchers in a given field. You see? So, yeah, it's I'm still able to recognize things brought from artificial intelligence that have not been reformulated. Of course, if you take the results of what DeepSeek says to you, and then you try to change the whole story a little bit and make it more complex, then it's very difficult to see. And I don't know what my Chinese colleagues are doing with that kind of result of the research done by their students when they use artificial intelligence. Would be very interesting to see in which sense this differs. I can tell you that in Germany, most of my colleagues are completely helpless. And the result is that when they smell that there's artificial intelligence, they completely wipe out let's say they do not accept, they will never accept something presented by artificial intelligence. It's a no-go. But I know that in different countries, this is the reactions are very different. More questions? Do we still have time? Sorry? It's okay. Perhaps one last question, if there's one. One last question. Okay, if there is no such thing as a question right now, I would be really happy if you reflect a little bit about the things I tried to develop in this talk. If you reflect on the things about the human mind, and if you reflect on the importance for children, to tell stories, but to get stories told by you, by human voice, not by recording, but by the human voice. Okay. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.